He held it there for a long second, then turned and sprinted into the woods behind our house. No sound, no rustling leaves, just a blur of motion, and he was gone. I screamed until I couldn't anymore. I cried until my throat was raw and my body hurt. My parents rushed in, this time finding me curled into the corner of my bed, shaking uncontrollably. Welcome to Dark Reddit, your late-night escape into eerie calm. I'm Alex, your voice in the dark and your guide through the unknown. This is Podcast 19, a shadowy chapter in our ever-growing collection of sleepless nights. Tonight's journey spans an hour and 5 minutes, a series of chilling tales, whispered into your ears, softly, slowly, designed to help your mind drift while the darkness unfolds around you. Before we begin, find a quiet, comfortable place to rest. Dim the lights, silence your world, and take one slow, steady breath. Now, close your eyes. Every story in tonight's episode is new, uncharted, untold, and unearthed from the darker corners of Reddit. Tales of strangers, shadows, and things that don't always stay in the past. Let your body grow heavy. Let your thoughts drift. You don't need to watch. You only need to listen. You're safe here. Now, let the night begin. It wasn't supposed to be anything. Just two teenagers, a boring winter night, and a house that no one ever stayed in for long. But that night gave me something I'll never forget. The feeling of being touched by darkness itself. When I was in high school, I had a best friend. Let's call him Jason. He lived in this quiet, older part of town. The kind where every lawn is neatly trimmed, and every house has stories you can't quite trust. His neighborhood had that aged, peaceful charm, except for one house. Right next door to him sat a modest, 1950s craftsman-style house. Beautiful on the outside, big picture windows, inviting porch, wraparound fence. But it had a reputation. You know, the kind people moved in and then moved out fast. Sometimes in the middle of the night. Furniture still inside. No explanations. Jason's family had been next-door neighbors for years, and never once had they gotten to know anyone who lived there. It became sort of a running joke between us. The cursed house, we called it. Every time we passed it, we'd laugh and say it was haunted. Just kids teasing each other. Until one night, we got bored enough to take the joke seriously. It was cold, the kind of December cold that makes the air feel hollow. Jason and I were hanging out in his room, playing music, watching the windows fog up, when he suddenly said, "Want to check out the house next door?" I gave him a look. Seriously, it's empty. Been empty for 2 months now. There's a dog door around back. I've gone in before. It's creepy, but he grinned. Why not? Maybe it was the boredom, or the curiosity, or just plain teenage bravado. But I said yes. We crept across the yard, hopping the low fence. The backyard was overgrown, but still somehow neat, like someone had been watching it but not touching it. Jason found the dog door and wriggled through, then opened the back door for me. Inside, it was dead silent. You could tell the electricity had been shut off. It was dark, but the glow from the streetlight outside bled through the picture window in the kitchen, painting everything in this sickly gray hue. The house felt paused, like someone had just stepped out and never returned. There was a built-in breakfast table by the window, still covered in dust, but oddly untouched. Jason and I sat down on the floor near it, just chatting in whispers. We weren't really exploring anymore, just sitting, daring the silence to talk back. Then it happened. I didn't hear anything at first. I was mid-sentence when Jason suddenly gasped. Not just gasped, screamed. And right then, everything changed. My vision shut off. Not like blinking, not like the lights going out. It was like something wrapped my entire head in cold, wet tar. I couldn't see, couldn't feel the floor under me, but I could feel something else. Cold, heavy, wet, suffocating. Like every inch of me had been dunked into a pool of something dark and living. I started screaming, clawing, reaching out for something, anything. Then, I felt Jason's hand grip mine, yanking me, dragging me through the coldness. Suddenly, light. My sight came back in pieces, like someone slowly pulling off blindfolds. I realized we were outside, standing under the streetlight. My lungs burned, and I was shaking uncontrollably. Jason didn't speak for a full minute. He just stared at the house. When he finally looked at me, he was pale. "You okay?" I nodded, though I definitely wasn't. What happened?" He swallowed hard. "You were talking," he said, his voice shaking. "And then I saw something crawl out from under the table." I just stared at him. It wasn't a person. It was like this black shape, like a girl but wrong. Thin, all shadows. She crawled out, real slow, and then just sat on you. Just sat on top of you. You stopped talking. You didn't even blink. I shook my head. No, I couldn't see. I couldn't feel anything but that cold. That horrible cold. Jason nodded slowly. "I didn't know what to do. I just grabbed you and pulled. I think, whatever it was, didn't want to come outside. We didn't go back. We couldn't. The house still stands there today, last I checked. And from what I heard, it still doesn't keep its residents for long. People leave in silence. Lights go off for months at a time. Jason and I stayed friends. We still talk about that night sometimes, when the conversation turns dark or the air feels strange. And no matter how many times we tell the story, we never change the details. Because there's nothing to change. It happened exactly like that. What scares me the most isn't that we saw something that night. It's that it knew we were there. It let us in. It waited for the right moment. And it sat on top of me like I was a chair it had been using for years. I've never felt that kind of blackness since. Not just cold, but sticky, alive, like it was clinging to my bones. For days after, I couldn't sleep. Couldn't even look at my own reflection without feeling like something was staring back from behind my eyes. People ask me why I don't believe in haunted houses. I tell them I do, but only the kind that look perfectly normal. The ones with pretty kitchens and cozy nooks and quiet rooms with dust that doesn't move. Because sometimes something waits under the table, and sometimes it decides you can't leave. My grandmother wasn't a woman prone to exaggeration. She lived through a war, raised kids in air raids, buried friends. When she spoke, you listened because her words were measured, and her silences even more so. And there was one story she told only a few times in her life, always quietly, always with a distant look in her eyes. She swore it was real until the day she died. It was 1944, London. The air still stank of smoke and metal. The Blitz had technically ended, but the city was far from safe. Random strikes, V1 flying bombs, destruction came from above like rolling dice. My grandmother, Evelyn, had already lost her home in an earlier bombing raid and was staying with a childhood friend near Clapham. She had my father with her. He was just a baby then, barely a year old, all soft curls and sleepy yawns. Her friend, Margaret, offered them a temporary refuge in her 3-story townhouse, worn but solid. The top floor had a spare room, a tiny, slanted ceiling nook with a view over the rooftops. Quiet, tidy, perfect for mother and child. That night, the air outside was still. Too still. No sirens, no wind, just a heavy, unnatural silence that seemed to press against the windows like it was waiting. Evelyn had just finished feeding my father when the clock struck 9. Time for bed. She wrapped him in a blanket, kissed his forehead, and started climbing the narrow staircase toward the top floor room. She was halfway up the stairs when she stopped. Not because of a sound, not because of anything she saw, but because someone was standing there. She would always describe it the same way. A figure, not shadow, not smoke, not a person I knew either, but solid enough that I felt I could have touched it. It wasn't transparent, not glowing, not some movie ghost with flickering edges. It was just there, still, calm, watching her with an expression that wasn't angry or menacing, just serious. She froze. Then the figure raised one arm slowly, palm out, and said in a voice so clear, it echoed in her chest, "Don't sleep in that room tonight." Nothing more. No explanation. No threat. Just that single, urgent command. My grandmother didn't wait to argue. She turned around and carried my father straight back downstairs, legs shaking the whole way. Margaret raised her eyebrows when Evelyn told her she wouldn't be sleeping in the top room. What? Why not? There's something wrong, she said, not wanting to sound mad. I just don't feel right about it. Margaret sighed, annoyed but understanding. She set up the sitting room for them, blankets on the couch, a pillow for Evelyn, a laundry basket with cushions for the baby. Outside, the stillness held. Sometime around 2:30 in the morning, the world exploded. Not the siren, not a warning, just boom. One of the bombs landed only a street away. The shockwave shattered windows, knocked pictures off walls. The roof shook. Glass rained into the kitchen. And then silence again, until the 3rd floor gave out with a crack like thunder. The roof had been struck, weakened enough by the blast that the top floor collapsed. Just caved in. Straight through the rafters, through the ceiling of the little slanted room. Right where my dad's cot had been set up. When the dust settled and daylight came, Evelyn and Margaret went upstairs. Carefully, slowly. Evelyn said she stood there in the doorway, staring at the ruins of what had been a safe space just hours earlier. Her knees gave out and she sat down hard on the stairs, clutching my father to her chest. She didn't cry. Not then, but she said her hands wouldn't stop shaking for days. Later, rescue workers confirmed that if anyone had been sleeping there, they wouldn't have survived. The beams had come down like spears. The wall had collapsed inward. The room was unrecognizable. She told me that story exactly 3 times in my life. The first time when I was 7 and asked if ghosts were real. The second time when I was 18 and nearly moved into a strange old house in college. The last time was 2 weeks before she passed. Her voice was thinner then, but steady. "I've never believed in nonsense," she said. "But I know what I saw that night. It wasn't fear or exhaustion. It wasn't grief or imagination. It was real." "Do you think it was an angel?" I asked. She smiled but didn't answer. "I think," she said after a long pause, "that sometimes we get warnings. No explanation, no logic. But if you listen, if you really listen, you might get to walk away with your life. Now that I'm older, I wonder about that figure on the stairs. Why then? Why her? Was it some guardian? A soul with a debt to repay? A relative from beyond? Or was it the house itself? Aware that death was coming, whispering its only warning. I'll never know, but I keep a cot for my son far from the attic. And whenever I walk up a narrow staircase in the quiet of night, I listen, just in case something is waiting to speak again." My mom told me this story only recently, and though it happened 10 years ago, it still sent a chill down my spine. I grew up in a family that didn't believe in ghosts. We were practical people, logical, grounded, not the superstitious kind. But this story changed how I see things. Changed everything. It starts with my cousin, Lila. Lila was 17 when the accident happened. Vibrant, funny, always wearing that same old red baseball cap backwards and her favorite denim dungarees. She had this tomboyish charm, the kind that made everyone love her instantly. She was close with all of us, but especially my Aunt Marie, my dad's sister, and her little ones. Lila practically helped raise them, always babysitting after school, helping with bedtime stories, singing made-up lullabies in the kitchen while making cereal at midnight. Then came the crash. It was sudden, stupid as most accidents are. A truck ran a red light. She made it through the impact, but passed 2 weeks later in the hospital. It gutted the family. Even now, I don't think we ever fully recovered. And that's when the strange part started. Aunt Marie's house was under construction during the weeks leading up to Lila's passing. They were remodeling the back end, knocking down a wall, adding a small extension, new drywall, the works. It was noisy, chaotic, always filled with the sound of hammers and shuffling feet. After Lila passed, the construction continued. Life had to, I suppose. The kids were too young to really understand, and Aunt Marie tried her best to hold it all together. Then one day, she got a phone call at work. It was the foreman of the crew, clearly annoyed. He told her a girl kept sneaking onto the property. A teenager. Always the same one, just walking around the site, sometimes standing in the living room, sometimes out back near the new foundation. Aunt Marie was confused. "No one should be there except you guys," she said. "Well, she doesn't talk," he said. "She just shows up, watches, then leaves." Thought maybe she was from the neighborhood. Curious and growing a little concerned, Aunt Marie asked him to describe the girl. Brown hair, long. Baseball cap, red, I think. Denim overalls. White jacket. She said her stomach dropped. That was Lila. Exactly as she looked the last day she came over to babysit. The outfit, the hat, even the jacket with the missing button on one sleeve. But Lila was gone. She told the foreman that gently, told him about the accident, the funeral, the hospital. There was a pause on the line. "She's the one we've been seeing?" he asked, voice shaking a little now. "I think so." Aunt Marie went home early that day. When she got there, she brought out a framed photo of Lila, taken the summer before, wearing that exact outfit, and showed it to the crew. Every single man on that site said yes. That was the girl. They stopped working for the day. I don't blame them. The foreman, a middle-aged guy named Greg who'd done years of construction work across the city, was pale and quiet. Later, he admitted that it hadn't been a one-time thing. He'd seen Lila 4 times, always in the morning, always near the unfinished part of the house. She never said a word, never made a sound. She just looked around, like she was checking on something, like she was waiting. I remember when I first heard this story. It was a rainy night. My mom and I were sitting at the kitchen table, and she told it like it was just a memory she'd forgotten to mention. Her voice wasn't dramatic or spooky, just thoughtful. "I don't know why she showed up," she said. "Maybe she didn't know she was gone yet. Maybe she was still attached to the house or to the kids." That's the part that hits me the hardest. Because, you see, a few nights before the construction ended, Aunt Marie had another experience. She was up late, folding laundry in the living room when her youngest, just barely 4, walked in, half asleep and clutching a stuffed bear. "I saw Lila," he said in a sleepy whisper. "She was in the new room. She smiled at me." Aunt Marie didn't ask any questions. She didn't correct him. She just pulled him into her arms and held him until he fell asleep again. The visits stopped after that. Once the construction was complete and the walls were sealed and painted, there were no more sightings, no more complaints from workers, no shadows at the edge of vision, no unspoken presences lingering in the corners of the house. It was like Lila had done what she needed to do, said her goodbye, made sure the home she'd loved so much, the family she loved so much, was safe and whole again. To this day, we talk about Lila with warmth, not with fear. But when that red baseball cap turned up in a storage box a year later, one we all thought had been thrown out with her old clothes, it made everyone stop for a moment. Aunt Marie keeps it in her room now on a little shelf just above the kids' baby photos. She doesn't say much about it, but every now and then, when the house gets quiet, she'll look toward the extension, smile faintly and whisper, "Thank you." It happened last summer, but it still lingers in my mind like smoke that won't clear. I'd gone back home for the holidays, staying at my parents' house. Quiet neighborhood, creaky old floors, familiar shadows that no longer scared me. At least they didn't then. Now, I'm not so sure. It was around 3 a.m. I remember because the room was totally silent aside from the low hum of my computer fan and the soft tapping of my fingers on the keyboard. Everyone else had long gone to sleep. I was deep into a rabbit hole of YouTube videos, half asleep, when my phone lit up next to me. Incoming call. My sister. I blinked. That was odd. Her room was just down the hall. Why would she call instead of just walking over? I answered immediately, "Hello." But as soon as I did, the line went dead. No background noise, no static, no voice, just click. I stared at my screen for a moment, puzzled. Then instinct took over. Maybe she was in trouble? Maybe something happened and she couldn't talk? I rushed out of my room and walked down the short hallway to hers. The moment I reached her door, before I could even knock, she screamed. It was the kind of scream that turns your blood cold. Not startled, not annoyed, terror. I didn't hesitate. I threw the door open, my heart pounding. She was sitting up in bed, trembling, eyes wild and full of panic. Her blanket was bunched around her waist, her breathing sharp and erratic. I scanned the room. Empty. Completely empty. Nobody was there. I closed the door behind me and hurried over to her. What happened? There was someone, she stammered, in here, right in front of my face. Her voice cracked. I woke up and there was this shadow. It wasn't like a person, just dark, almost like smoke, and it was just watching me. She was shaking. I could see the tears clinging to her lashes. I put a hand on her shoulder. You called me, I said. I thought maybe. She cut me off, still gasping. No, I didn't call you. My phone's downstairs. I left it in my bag. I stared at her for a second. My heart gave a slow, uneasy thump. I pulled my phone from my pocket. The call log was still there, plain as day. 3:02 a.m. Incoming call. Sister's name. I showed it to her. She shook her head. No, I was asleep. I didn't touch my phone. We both went downstairs together. Her bag was still hanging on the hook by the door. She reached inside, pulled out her phone. Battery low but on. Locked screen. We checked her call log. Nothing. No outgoing call. Nothing around that time at all. But the call was on my phone. We sat in the living room, not talking much. Both of us staring at each other and then at her phone like it might do something again. Maybe you dialed it in your sleep, I offered weakly. She shook her head. It wasn't even in my room. The house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. My skin prickled. Not cold, not warm, just off, like the air wasn't quite right. What did it look like? I finally asked. She hesitated, then whispered. It didn't have a face or eyes, just this presence. It leaned toward me. I could feel it, like pressure on my chest and ice on my skin. And then you screamed? I felt it breathe, right before I screamed. I didn't sleep that night. Neither did she. We told our parents the next morning. They brushed it off as a bad dream, even though the call on my phone was real. Her phone had no record, and yet mine still showed it for days until the log finally pushed it down. But things didn't stop there. Over the next few nights, lights flickered randomly in the hallway. My door opened once, slowly, in the dead of night. I thought it was just the draft, until I remembered I always kept it locked. And one evening, while brushing my teeth, I swear I saw someone standing just behind me in the mirror. I turned. Nothing. But the feeling, like someone was still watching, lingered long after I'd gone back to bed. My sister said she'd sometimes wake up to the feeling of someone pulling at her blanket. Once, she even heard footsteps stop outside her door. Slow, deliberate, and then nothing. We never got an answer. No one could explain the call. No one could explain the shadow. But something happened that night. Something real. And every now and then, when I'm lying in bed back in my apartment, phone resting silently beside me, I still think about it. What if I hadn't answered? What if I'd ignored that call, thinking it was a glitch? Would my sister still have screamed? Would she have woken up at all? I'll never know, but I've kept the call log, a screenshot, just in case. Because when the silence falls at 3 a.m. again and the phone lights up, I don't know if I'll be brave enough to pick up. It's been over a decade since it happened, and yet all it takes is one late-night conversation for the memory to come rushing back like a current, sharp, strange, and completely unexplained. Every single one of us remembers it the same way. Not one detail has ever changed. I was 10 years old. Our house was packed that night with cousins and siblings. 10 kids total, all of us buzzing with sugar and chaos because the adults had gone out to dinner, leaving us alone for the evening. No babysitter, just the oldest cousins, 15 and 16 at the time, unofficially in charge while the rest of us huddled in the living room eating popcorn and watching movies. It was one of those rare nights where everything felt fun and free, where you didn't worry about bedtime or rules. And then it happened. I remember the exact moment. The movie had just hit a quiet scene, some old Disney VHS with music that faded to silence. And that's when the entire house shook. I mean, shook. Not a little rumble like a truck driving past. Not a creaky wall groaning in the night. It was like the ground beneath us suddenly pulsed. The walls trembled. The lights flickered. And every picture frame on the wall rattled like something huge had landed nearby. At that exact second, a blinding flash of white light filled the entire living room, as if lightning had struck just outside the back window. But there was no thunder, no rain, just silence, and then the sound of 10 kids absolutely losing it. We screamed and bolted, like a school of fish reacting all at once. I don't even remember choosing to run. We all just ran into the hallway, our safe zone, slamming the door behind us. Some of us were crying, some shaking, others furiously asking, "What was that?" Over and over again. The oldest cousin grabbed the landline phone. This was just before smartphones were everywhere, and nearly dialed 911. We all agreed it felt like something had exploded in the backyard. But after a quick, frantic debate, they decided to call our parents first. While we waited, huddled together on the hallway carpet, my ears rang from adrenaline and silence. It was as if time had paused, like the world outside our door wasn't quite right anymore. Eventually, curiosity won. Armed with kitchen tools, a broom, a tennis racket, someone even had a spatula, we crept back out to the living room. The TV was still playing, the popcorn spilled, lights back to normal. But everything felt heavier, like the room had been touched by something. We drew the curtains open to check the backyard. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. No burn marks. No broken tree limbs. No smoke or signs of anything falling from the sky. The trampoline was still standing. The grass unmoved. It was as if the flash, the rumble, the shockwave, none of it had ever happened. But it had. All of us felt it, saw it, heard it. Our parents got home shortly after. I'll never forget how we rushed to the front door like we were being rescued. We told them everything, all speaking over one another, trying to convince them we weren't just playing a prank. They did a sweep of the yard with flashlights and checked the neighbors, but nothing seemed off. No other houses lost power. Nobody heard or saw anything strange. They told us it was probably a power surge, or maybe just a transformer nearby. But transformers don't shake a house and light up the sky like that. We knew what we felt. The years passed, but the memory never faded. It became our family's favorite mystery. At every reunion, someone eventually brought it up. Remember the flash in the backyard? It was like a bomb, right? What was that? I've heard stories of shared hallucinations, of mass panic and overactive imaginations, especially among kids. But 10 of us, all remembering the exact same details, the exact same time, the exact same feeling, it felt like something had breached the fabric of reality for just a second. Like a tear had opened in the air and something peeked through. We sometimes joke about aliens or ghosts or time glitches, but there's something beneath the laughter, a pause in our voices, a look we share when someone says, "What if it wasn't a joke?" Because it didn't feel funny, felt wrong. To this day, I sometimes stare out the back window of that house when I visit, wondering if it could happen again. If something is still there, dormant, invisible, just waiting. That same patch of grass, that same night silence. It almost dares you to ask for an answer. But I don't ask anymore, because deep down, I'm not sure I want one. When you're 17 and freshly licensed, the world suddenly feels like a playground, bigger, wilder, full of possibilities you never had when someone else was behind the wheel. For me and my group of high school friends, that freedom turned into a mission. Explore every abandoned or half-built house we could find. Sometimes we'd sneak in just to poke around. Sometimes, if the place felt right, we'd throw late-night parties and leave just before dawn. But there was one house none of us ever forgot. I'd passed it on my way home from my part-time job more times than I could count. A big, hulking property that sat on the edge of town, hidden just beyond a tree line with a half-paved driveway leading to a structure that had never been finished. From the road, it looked like it had the bones of a mansion, but it had clearly been abandoned mid-construction. No windows, no doors. Just a quiet, empty shell of a house with an eerily large backyard that sloped into thick woods. One summer evening, right before we were supposed to catch a movie, I convinced my friend Carter to check it out with me. It was around 8:30 p.m., the kind of summer dusk where the sky is purple and the headlights come on even though it's not quite dark yet. We drove down the narrow side road and turned into the gravel entrance. I only pulled in far enough for my headlights to light up the front of the house, just to get a look. We sat there for maybe 10 seconds, tops. Neither of us got out. The place felt off, like it had a heartbeat you couldn't hear unless you were too close. So I backed out and turned onto the road again, headed toward the intersection where the main street cut through. That's when the truck appeared. Big, black, and mean-looking. No plates on the front. It came up behind us almost instantly, high beams glaring into my rearview mirror, practically kissing my back bumper. Carter glanced behind. Where the hell did that guy come from? I don't know, I said, trying to sound calm but feeling my stomach twist. He stayed right on us. No honking, no flashing lights, just following. I tried to ignore it, hoping once we hit the main road he'd back off. But he didn't. At the light, I signaled to turn right, and just as I did, the truck peeled off and cut through the corner gas station's parking lot, straight across the grass, and blocked us at the exit. I slammed the brakes. He got out. This man, if you could call him that, was built like a wrestler. Tall, broad shoulders, bald head that gleamed in the streetlight. He walked over like he had all the time in the world, one hand on his hip like he was packing something. I saw Carter's eyes go wide, and I felt the panic in my chest, but I kept my hands on the wheel, pretending to stay cool. He knocked on my window, slow and heavy. I rolled it down a few inches. "What were you boys doing at the house?" he asked, voice low and gravelly. Just turning around," I said. "We were gonna be late for a movie." He stared at me, then glanced over at Carter, then back at me. That pause, those 2 seconds, felt like a lifetime. Then he smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was wide, with teeth that looked too perfect. Like someone trying to mimic friendliness but getting the human part just wrong. "You didn't go inside?" he asked. "No, sir. Just turned around." He studied me for a moment longer, then gave a single nod. "All right then. You boys drive safe." He stepped back, climbed into his truck, and slowly reversed to let us through. I don't think either of us said a word until we were a mile away. We never went back. But the more I thought about that moment, the stranger it became. The way he just appeared, the perfect timing, the way the whole street suddenly emptied as if we were the only ones in that world. The following week, I drove past the house again in the daylight, still abandoned, still no signs of life. But I noticed something I hadn't before: motion sensor cameras. Brand new. One tucked in the tree line, one aimed at the driveway. And the weirdest part? Despite how large and obvious the house was, it never appeared on real estate sites. No for sale sign, no county construction permits. It was as if the property didn't officially exist. That's when the rumors started clicking into place. Some kids at school mentioned hearing stories about that lot, how it had sat half-finished for over a decade. Contractors would start, then vanish. No one lived there. No one ever had. But somehow the grass was always cut. The property never decayed. People said it was a drug operation. Others whispered about cults, or that it was owned by some black market doctor who trafficked God knows what. Every theory ended with the same sentence: "But no one goes near it." Carter and I made a pact that day to never talk about it around our parents. It became one of those secrets that you carry like a scar, unseen, but always there. To this day, that house still stands exactly the same. Still unfinished. Still hollow. And every so often, I drive past it on my way through town. I don't slow down. I don't look too long. But I always check my mirrors, just in case he pulls up behind me again. My house has always felt off. It's not old or creaky, and there's no tragic backstory about a family vanishing or an architect going mad mid-construction. It's just weird. The kind of weird you can't quite explain, but feel in your bones when you're alone with nothing but your thoughts, and maybe something else just outside your line of sight. It's set farther back on the lot than any of my neighbors, with this long, awkward sidewalk that cuts through the grass like someone wanted to build a path to nowhere. It leads right up to the porch and into the living room, which, for some reason, is fronted by these huge, fixed-pane windows. Beautiful in the day, horrifying at night, because when it gets dark, the windows become mirrors, and anything outside becomes invisible. But if you're inside with a light on, you might as well be a fish in a bowl. The week this happened, the rest of my family was off in Florida. Sun, sand, drinks with fruit in them. I was left to watch the house, which basically meant eat pizza, drink heavily, and binge old horror movies I wasn't brave enough to watch growing up. That night, I passed out around 9 p.m., curled up on the living room couch directly beneath those massive windows. I didn't make it to my bedroom, not because I was that drunk, but because something about walking past that long stretch of hallway alone felt wrong. Sounds silly now, but the house already felt like it was watching me. I woke up with a jolt. No sound, no dream, no reason I could name. Just that primal, ice-in-your-veins sensation that something wasn't right. I lay there for a second, heartbeat slamming against my ribs. The room was still, too still. My skin crawled with chills, the kind that ripple when you know you're being watched. Then it started. Bang. Right above my head. On the glass. Not a tap. A full force, open palm slam. I froze. Eyes wide. Still laying flat on the couch. Afraid even to breathe. Slowly, I tilted my head just enough to look up. There was someone at the window. Just standing there, face shadowed, hands flat against the glass. I couldn't see features, just the silhouette, but they were close, inches away. Whoever it was, they had to be standing on the narrow strip of concrete right outside, staring in, watching me sleep. I glanced at the cable box. 3:08 a.m. The banging started again. Bang. Bang, bang. Each hit made the couch vibrate slightly beneath me. I didn't move. I didn't dare. Something told me, warned me, that moving would make it worse. Then silence. I stayed completely still. The only sound was my pulse thudding in my ears. Just when I thought it was over, it began again. But this time from two places. Bang, bang. Bang. From the window. Thud. 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 From the front door. They were coordinated. One figure outside the window. Another at the door. Pounding in turns. Rhythmically. Like a twisted ritual. My mouth was dry. My limbs were numb. Every instinct screamed at me to run. But where? The front door was blocked. The window, too big, too exposed. I pulled my phone from under the couch cushions with shaking fingers and dialed 911. But as I did, I stopped myself. What would I even say? 2 people are knocking on my house? Felt wrong. Like if I involved someone else, they'd disappear before help arrived. Then I'd sound crazy. And worse, maybe they'd come back later, when I was really alone. So I did nothing. For 40 straight minutes, they kept pounding. No shouting, no laughter, just the dull, heavy rhythm of someone trying to be let in without ever saying a word. And then, just like that, they stopped. No footsteps, no retreating sounds, just stillness. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't move. I laid there on the couch, staring at the ceiling with bloodshot eyes, flinching every time the house creaked. My heart never slowed. By the time the sun rose, my hands were still trembling. I opened the front door slowly, half expecting to find footprints or markings, or worse, someone waiting. But the yard was empty. No dents in the door. No fingerprints on the window. Not even a scuff on the sidewalk. Like nothing had happened. I called my friend Jake later that morning and asked him, begged him, to stay the rest of the week with me. His answer? What the fuck for? So we can both be murdered in our sleep. Thanks, Jake. I didn't stay alone, though. I ended up sleeping in the basement the rest of the week. No windows, no reflections. No way for someone to stand silently inches from my face. But even now, years later, I can't fall asleep in the living room. I don't even walk past those windows after dark. I installed curtains, but somehow it's worse knowing someone could be out there. And I'd never know. Sometimes on windless nights, I think I hear the faintest tapping on the glass. Just 3 soft knocks, then silence. And I remember the figure, faceless, still, watching me through the window while I slept. When you're a kid, weekends feel like a different kind of freedom. For me, it meant being able to stay up late watching Nick at Night in the living room, with a pillow and blanket on the couch and no bedtime breathing down my neck. My parents were chill about it because my sister, who slept in the next room, needed the quiet. So the living room became my little kingdom. Dim glow from the TV, soft hum of crickets outside, and the occasional bark from our dog, Blue. I was maybe 7 or 8 the night it happened. Still small enough to feel invincible with a blanket pulled up to my chin, but old enough to know when something was really, really wrong. I dozed off somewhere around the 3rd episode of I Love Lucy. It must have been past midnight when I woke up. Suddenly. Not groggy, not confused. Just wide awake. Like someone had flipped a switch in my brain. And I felt it. That feeling. Like static crawling over your skin. A warning from some deep down part of your gut that doesn't need evidence to scream. You are not alone. I bolted upright. The TV was still on but muted. The room a wash of soft, flickering blue. I turned my head to the front window. The curtains were drawn back as usual. Outside, rural Georgia stretched out in an endless ocean of trees. The moon high and heavy in the sky, casting silver shadows across the yard. That's when I saw him, up in the tree, a silhouette. It wasn't a branch or a shadow or a trick of the light. Someone was in the tree, perched, watching, frozen. My breath caught in my chest. Couldn't scream, couldn't move. All I could do was stare. And then Blue, the sweetest mutt you'd ever meet, charged at the window, barking and snarling like I'd never heard him before. The kind of sound that tears out of something not because it wants to be loud, but because it's terrified. That's what broke me free. I tore down the hallway, feet pounding against the hardwood floor. I crashed into my parents' room, shaking, tears already streaming down my face as I tried to tell them. The words were tumbling out too fast, but my dad understood enough. He grabbed the baseball bat he kept by the nightstand, called Blue to heel, and went out into the yard like some small-town superhero ready to confront whatever psycho was lurking in our trees. My mom held me, murmuring calming things I don't remember. I just kept my eyes locked on the window in their room, waiting for the silhouette to return. But it didn't. Not there, at least. My dad came back 10 minutes later. "No one's out there," he said. "Probably just a shadow or your imagination." But it wasn't. I knew it wasn't. Even so, I tried to convince myself he was right. I was just tired. It was late. Maybe I'd fallen asleep and dreamed it. I couldn't go back to the living room. I told my sister what happened. She grumbled and rolled over, barely listening. Dad, now fully awake and on alert, made slow rounds through the house, cup of coffee in one hand and that same old bat in the other. I lay in bed, eyes wide, ears pricked for every creak or thud. Eventually, the tension eased. My sister was snoring softly, and the house felt still again, safe even I turned toward the window, ready to finally let sleep take me. That's when I saw him. Again. Not in the tree. Not in the yard. At the window. My window. He was standing just outside, close enough to fog the glass if he breathed. In the moonlight, I could make out the shape of his face, pale and impossibly still. His eyes were locked on mine, unblinking. Then he lifted his hand and placed one finger to his lips. Shoo! He held it there for a long second, then turned and sprinted into the woods behind our house. No sound, no rustling leaves, just a blur of motion, and he was gone. I screamed until I couldn't anymore. I cried until my throat was raw and my body hurt. My parents rushed in, this time finding me curled into the corner of my bed, shaking uncontrollably. Dad searched again. The woods, the yard, the road, nothing. No footprints, no sign anyone had been there. For years, they chalked it up to a nightmare. That's what everyone tells you when you're a kid and something doesn't make sense. You were dreaming. It wasn't real. You just imagined it. But I didn't. I never forgot his face, or the finger, or the silence. And I never stayed in that living room again. Even now, as an adult, I keep my bedroom window locked tight, the curtains drawn at night. I don't care if it's hot. I don't care if the moon is beautiful. I don't care if I'm 28 and living in a high-rise with security at the door. Because sometimes, not often, but sometimes, I wake up with that prickly feeling again. And I swear I hear a whisper behind the glass. Shoo. It's another quiet night in the sprawling mansion. The kind of silence that seems almost unnatural, thick and heavy in the air. I was sitting in the living room, watching the flicker of the baby monitor that sat on the table beside me, keeping an eye on my client, Mr. Peterson. He was sleeping in his room upstairs, as he did every night. My job was simple. Stay awake, make sure he didn't get up and wander, make sure he didn't fall. He had dementia, and for the last 6 months, I had been his overnight caregiver, tasked with ensuring he stayed safe in his own home. It was a routine, but not one without its strange moments. That night, the house seemed unusually still. Even the creaking of the old floors seemed to have been swallowed by the vast, empty space of the mansion. I tried to focus on my book, the pages barely rustling in the silence, but my eyes kept drifting to the baby monitor and the still image of Mr. Peterson sleeping soundly in his bed. It was 11:11 p.m. when it happened. I'm not sure what made me look at the monitor at that exact moment. Maybe it was the fact that everything felt so unsettlingly quiet, or maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me, trying to distract from the eerie calm of the house. But as soon as I glanced at the screen, my stomach dropped. The blankets on Mr. Peterson's bed, which had been neatly tucked around him, began to lift. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light or some glitch in the monitor. But no. There they were, the blankets, rising slowly into the air, as though invisible hands were gently lifting them up. They hovered for a moment, suspended just above Mr. Peterson's body. And then, just as suddenly, they fell back down. My breath caught in my throat. I stared at the screen, unsure of what I had just witnessed. The room on the monitor was still. Mr. Peterson didn't stir, didn't wake up. He was oblivious to whatever had just happened. I leaned forward, feeling the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Could it have been a draft? There were no open windows in his room, and his door was closed. It didn't make sense. A draft couldn't do that. And yet, There was no explanation for what I had just seen. I tried to shake it off, telling myself that it was probably just a glitch, or perhaps I had imagined it. After all, I had been alone in this massive house for hours, and the silence was starting to get to me. The house was so quiet at night it was almost oppressive. I had always felt a little uneasy in the mansion after dark. There was something about the vastness of it, the way the hallways stretched on endlessly, the feeling of being watched even when no one was around. I tried to focus on my book again, but the image of the blankets lifting wouldn't leave my mind. I glanced at the monitor once more, just to reassure myself that everything was fine, but the screen was still frozen on the image of Mr. Peterson sleeping peacefully. There were no signs of movement, no disturbance, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the quiet house. 11:15 p.m., then 11:16. I stood up from the couch and walked to the kitchen, trying to shake the growing sense of unease. I needed something to calm my nerves, so I made a cup of tea. The kettle whistled and the warm steam filled the air as I poured the water into the mug. I sipped slowly, trying to steady my hands, but every time I glanced toward the baby monitor, that image of the blankets lifting replayed in my mind. I couldn't get rid of the feeling that something wasn't right. I wandered through the mansion, checking the locks on the doors, making sure everything was as it should be. As I passed by the staircase that led up to Mr. Peterson's room, I felt a cold chill run down my spine. There was no breeze, no open windows, nothing that would explain it. I stopped for a moment, staring up the staircase, but all I saw was the darkened hallway above. Everything was still. Everything was quiet, and yet, something was wrong. I returned to my post in the living room, feeling the weight of the house pressing in on me. The silence had become unbearable. It wasn't normal to be this alone in such a large place. There were sounds, small creaks and groans, that I couldn't explain, like the house itself was alive and breathing in the darkness. I glanced at the monitor again. Mr. Peterson's room was unchanged, but something still felt off. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that I wasn't truly alone. Just as I was about to pick up my book again, the lights flickered. A quick, sharp flicker that lasted only a second, but it was enough to make my pulse quicken. I stood up from the couch and made my way to the hallway, looking up toward the dark staircase. Everything seemed normal again, but the unease in my chest refused to fade. And then, as I stood there, I heard it, a soft thud, followed by another. It was coming from upstairs, from Mr. Peterson's room. I froze. The thuds continued, slow, deliberate. My heart pounded in my chest. I took a deep breath and slowly made my way upstairs, each step feeling heavier than the last. I reached the door to Mr. Peterson's room and hesitated before opening it. The door creaked as it swung open, revealing the darkened interior. The room was as I had left it. Mr. Peterson lay in his bed, still asleep. But then I saw it. The blankets, now back in place on the bed, moved again. They twitched, as if something underneath was stirring. I rushed to the side of the bed, my hand trembling as I reached for Mr. Peterson's arm to check on him. He was still sleeping, his breathing steady. But the blankets, they rose once more just as they had before. Gently, slowly, as though an invisible hand was lifting them from the bed. I backed away from the bed, my breath coming in short gasps. This wasn't just a draft. It wasn't a glitch. Something was in this house with me. I grabbed my phone and texted a friend, my fingers shaking. Something's happening. I don't know what, but I'm scared. The phone buzzed with a reply. Call the police. I didn't know if it was paranoia or real fear, but I had no intention of staying in that house a moment longer. As I turned to leave the room, I heard it again, the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind me. You've made it through the hour. The stories are over now, and the night is quiet again. Let the silence soothe you. Whatever followed you from the tales, leave it here. You're safe, you're calm, and you're already drifting deeper into rest. If you enjoyed these stories, consider subscribing to Dark Reddit for more nightly chills. Until next time, sleep well.